It was late, really late, when I finally touched down at O'Hare. The flight had been delayed for hours, and by the time we landed it was well past midnight. The terminal was nearly empty, the kind of emptiness that gives you an eerie feeling, like something isn't quite right. My heels clicked against the cold tile floor as I made my way through the baggage claim area. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, adding to the uncomfortable quiet. I rubbed my temples, trying to shake off the exhaustion from the 3-day business trip. All I wanted was to be in my own bed, in my own apartment, away from all this. I opened the Rideshare app on my phone and requested a ride home. There weren't many drivers available, but one popped up within a few minutes, Derek. He had a decent rating, nothing spectacular, but I didn't care at this point. I just wanted to get home. His car pulled up, black sedan, clean but nothing fancy. Derek rolled down the window and gave me a nod. "You Samantha?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a polite smile. He didn't seem dangerous, just a regular guy doing a job. I tossed my luggage in the back seat and climbed in, the soft smell of cheap air freshener filling the car. As we pulled away from the curb, I felt the familiar relief of knowing I was almost home. The first few minutes were quiet. I scrolled through my phone, catching up on emails, messages, and trying to unwind. Derek had some soft, nondescript music playing in the background. It was relaxing, I'll give him that. "Long trip?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "Yeah, too long," I replied, my voice more tired than I meant it to be. He chuckled. "I hear that a lot. But hey, at least it's over now, right?" I nodded absently, looking out the window. The streets were mostly empty, save for a few late-night taxis and the occasional straggler making their way home. We merged onto the highway, the lights of the city fading behind us as we moved into the suburbs. My eyelids felt heavy, the exhaustion of the trip catching up with me. I leaned my head against the window, watching the world blur by. After about 10 minutes, I noticed something strange. We were taking an exit I didn't recognize. I sat up straighter, glancing at the app on my phone. The map showed we were still en route, but this wasn't the way I usually went home. Maybe it was construction, maybe there was traffic, I didn't know. Still, something about it felt wrong. "Hey, isn't this a little out of the way?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Derek glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, the app's rerouting us. There's some construction on the main road." I frowned. I didn't see any construction when I left. He didn't respond right away, just kept driving, his hands gripping the wheel a little too tightly. My unease started to grow. I checked the app again. It still showed we were heading in the right direction, but the surroundings were unfamiliar. We were moving deeper into a residential area. Small houses, narrow streets, and barely any streetlights. "Are you sure about this? I don't mind a little detour, but this seems way out of the way," I said, my heart starting to pound a little faster. Derek didn't answer right away. He just kept driving, the car moving further away from the main roads. My phone buzzed in my hand and I glanced down to see that I had barely any signal left. That familiar tightness of panic started to creep into my chest. "Look, I don't feel comfortable with this. Can we just take the regular route?" I asked again, trying to keep the anxiety out of my voice. Derek's expression hardened. "It's not safe to go that way tonight, trust me." That's when I really started to panic. Not safe? What did he mean by that? I looked around the car, trying to think of what to do. My hands were shaking slightly as I opened the messages app on my phone, quickly sending a text to my friend. "Something's not right. Call the police. I'll send my location." But the message didn't go through. The signal was too weak. I felt trapped, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. "What do you mean it's not safe?" I asked, my voice rising a little. Derek didn't respond right away. He just kept driving. the car moving deeper into the residential maze. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "There are people looking for you," he said quietly, almost like he didn't want to say it out loud. His eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "I can't explain everything right now, but you need to trust me. I'm getting you out of here." My mind raced. This couldn't be happening. I wasn't involved in anything illegal. I was just a regular person, a businesswoman who had just finished a work trip. What the hell was he talking about? I tried the door handle, but it was locked, and the child lock was engaged. I was trapped. "What do you mean people are looking for me? I don't know what you're talking about," I shouted, my voice shaking. Derek didn't answer. Instead, he made another sharp turn, the car bouncing slightly as we hit a pothole. We were now in a more rural area, trees lining the road, the houses spaced further apart. It was dark, too dark. I could barely make out the outlines of the buildings as we sped past them. I pulled out my phone again, desperately trying to get a signal, but it was useless. No bars, no way to call for help. My heart was racing, and I felt like I was going to be sick. "Please, just let me out. I can find my own way home," I pleaded, my voice cracking. Derek didn't slow down. "You don't get it. If I let you out now, they'll find you." I didn't know who they were, but I didn't want to stick around to find out. I started to hyperventilate, my chest tightening as the panic set in. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Was he kidnapping me? Was he part of some human trafficking ring? Or was this some sick game? Just then, headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it might be another car, maybe someone who could help. But as the car got closer, I noticed it wasn't slowing down. If anything, it was speeding up, heading straight for us. Derek cursed under his breath and slammed on the gas, the car lurching forward as we sped down the dark road. The car behind us did the same, its headlights glaring in the mirror, making it impossible to see. "What the hell is going on?" I screamed, gripping the edge of the seat. "They're here," Derek muttered, his voice tense. "Hang on." Before I could ask who they were, the car behind us swerved, trying to run us off the road. Derek jerked the wheel, narrowly avoiding a ditch as the car skidded around a tight corner. My heart was in my throat, and I was sure we were going to crash. The car behind us slammed into our rear bumper, the force jolting me forward in my seat. I screamed, clutching the seatbelt as we veered off the road and into a gravel path that led deeper into the woods. The trees loomed overhead, casting long shadows in the headlights, and the car bounced violently over the uneven ground. "Derek, stop! Just stop!" I screamed, my voice hoarse. "I can't. Not yet," he replied, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. The other car was still behind us, its headlights flashing like some kind of horror movie. They were relentless, closing the distance again. Another jolt hit our car as they rammed us from behind, and I was certain we were going to flip over. Derek suddenly swerved, pulling into a narrow driveway hidden behind a wall of trees. He killed the lights and motioned for me to stay quiet. The other car sped past, not noticing where we had gone. For a moment, there was silence. My ears rang from the adrenaline, and I could feel my entire body shaking. Derek's breathing was heavy, and I could see sweat dripping down the side of his face. I didn't know what to think. Was he saving me, or was this all some sick setup?
"We're safe for now," he whispered, though his voice was anything but reassuring.
I didn't trust him. I couldn't. Not after everything that just happened. I reached for the door handle again, frantically trying to unlock it. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Derek said, his voice soft but firm. "They're still out there." I froze, my hand hovering over the handle. "Who the hell are they?" demanded, my voice barely above a whisper. Derek sighed, leaning back in his seat. "It's a long story, but the short version, you're part of something bigger than you realize. These people, they've been tracking your movements for a while now. They know who you are, where you work, where you live. They intercepted your rideshare request tonight. If I hadn't picked you up, someone else would have. And believe me, you wouldn't have liked how that ended." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This couldn't be real. It was too far-fetched, too insane, but the fear in Derek's eyes, that was real. And the car that had been chasing us, that was real too. "So what now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We wait," he said simply. "For what?" "For backup." Just then, blue and red lights flashed through the trees, and a police car pulled up behind us. Relief washed over me as an officer stepped out of the vehicle. He approached cautiously, one hand on his holster. "You Samantha?" the officer asked, shining a flashlight through the window. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "You're safe now," the officer said, his voice calm. "Derek here works with us. He's been trying to get you to safety all night." I blinked, trying to process what he was saying. Derek worked with the police? This whole thing had been a rescue mission? The officer glanced at Derek and nodded. "Good job. We'll take it from here." Derek sighed, leaning back in his seat. "Told you I was trying to help," he muttered. I didn't know what to think, to believe. All I knew was that somehow, against all odds, I had survived. It was another day in the bustling heart of Washington, D.C. I had parked near the Lincoln Memorial, just waiting for a ride request to ping on my phone. Ever since I installed that dash cam in my car, I felt a little more at ease. You know, just an extra layer of protection. I'd heard enough horror stories from other drivers to know you could never be too careful in this job. Some drivers had been robbed, others had dealt with more unsettling passengers. Fortunately for me, I'd never had any real trouble, but the dash cam was there just in case. Washington, D.C. was a city full of people who didn't like to stay still. Politicians, bureaucrats, tourists, all of them rushing from one place to the next. So when I got a request from a guy named Michael with a pickup near the memorial, I didn't think anything of it. The ping came through my phone. "Pick up Michael. Destination 600 Pennsylvania Ave NW." A government building, which wasn't unusual. When I pulled up to the curb, I saw him standing there, Michael. He was pacing back and forth, glancing at his phone and occasionally looking over his shoulder like he was expecting someone. His suit was a little rumpled, his tie slightly askew, and he clutched a small, well-worn leather briefcase in his hand. Something about him seemed off, but I chalked it up to a rough day at the office or some high-pressure government job. I'd seen that kind of tension plenty of times. DC can grind people down, no doubt about it. I rolled down the window and gave him a quick nod. "You Michael?" "Yeah, that's me," he replied, his voice a little shaky. He opened the door and slid into the back seat, clutching his briefcase even tighter. His hands were trembling, but again, I thought maybe he was just one of those high-strung guys always on edge. "You heading to Pennsylvania Avenue?" I asked, just to confirm. Yeah. Let's get going. Quickly, please." The way he said it, with a sense of urgency, made me raise an eyebrow. I didn't question him, though. I started driving, merging into traffic as the Lincoln Memorial faded in the rearview mirror. As we headed towards the downtown area, I noticed Michael kept glancing out the rear window, his eyes darting nervously. After a few minutes, he leaned forward. "Is that a dash cam?" he asked, his voice more anxious than curious. "Yeah, just for safety. You know, in case anything happens," I said casually. It records everything automatically. Don't worry, it's no big deal. His eyes lingered on the camera for a moment, then he slumped back into his seat, sighing. I could see his knuckles turning white as he gripped his briefcase. Good, good, he muttered under his breath. That's good. The more I watched him through the rearview mirror, the more I could feel the tension radiating from him. He wasn't just nervous, he was terrified. That's when I noticed the black SUV behind us. Normally I wouldn't think twice about it, but this one had been tailing us for several blocks, keeping a steady distance but never pulling ahead. It was always 2 cars back, moving when we moved, turning when we turned. I wasn't the only one who noticed. Michael was now staring at the SUV with wide eyes, his breathing quickening. "They're following us," he whispered, barely audible over the sound of traffic. I chuckled nervously, trying to lighten the mood. "Man, come on. This isn't some spy movie. You think you're James Bond or something?" He shot me a look that froze the smile on my face. "I'm serious," he hissed. "Just keep driving, don't stop." Something about the way he said it, the desperation in his voice, sent a chill down my spine. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel as I glanced in the rearview mirror again. The SUV was still there, creeping along like a shadow. "Who are they?" I asked, my voice lower now. Michael didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out his phone and began typing furiously. After a few moments, he muttered, "Just keep driving and don't look back. We'll be fine if you just keep driving." His cryptic response only made me more uneasy. We drove in silence for a few more blocks, the tension in the car thick enough to cut with a knife. Every few seconds I would glance at the rearview mirror, and sure enough, the black SUV was still there, keeping its distance but never disappearing. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "All right, man, what the hell is going on? Who's following us? Is this some kind of joke?" Michael's hands were shaking as he ran them through his hair, his briefcase now on his lap. "It's not a joke," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm in trouble, okay? Big trouble?" I didn't know whether to believe him or not, but the fear in his eyes was real. My heart was racing, and every fiber of my being told me to pull over and let him out. But something kept me going, a mix of curiosity and dread. I needed to know what was happening. As we neared the capital, Michael's phone buzzed again. He looked down at the screen, his face growing paler by the second. "They're getting closer," he muttered. "We need to lose them now." "What do you mean, lose them? I'm a rideshare driver, not a getaway driver." I snapped, feeling the panic rise in my chest. "Just drive faster, take some side streets, don't let them catch up." Against my better judgment, I pressed harder on the gas, weaving through traffic. My eyes were glued to the rearview mirror, and the SUV was still there, gaining on us now. Michael's phone buzzed again, and this time he cursed under his breath. I took a sharp right, cutting through a side street that was less crowded. The SUV followed. My heart was pounding in my chest. I wasn't trained for this. This wasn't supposed to happen. I was just a driver, for God's sake. "Take another left, then a right. We need to get to Pennsylvania Avenue," Michael said, his voice trembling. I did as he asked, navigating the maze of streets near the capital, but the SUV was relentless. Every turn we made, they followed. My palms were sweaty, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. We sped through the streets, and for a moment I thought we had lost them. But just as we neared Pennsylvania Avenue, the black SUV appeared again, this time pulling alongside us. My heart skipped a beat as the window rolled down, revealing a man in a black suit staring straight at us. "They've got us," Michael whispered. "They're here." Before I could process what was happening, the SUV swerved in front of us, cutting us off. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as we came to a sudden stop. "What the hell, man?" I yelled, my heart racing. Michael was frozen in his seat, his eyes wide with fear. The door of the SUV opened, and out stepped the man in the black suit. He walked towards us with purpose, his expression cold and calculated. "Stay calm," Michael said, though his voice was anything but calm. He reached into his briefcase, and for a split second I thought he was pulling out a gun. But instead he pulled out a badge, an FBI badge. What the hell? "I'm FBI," Michael said, his voice trembling. "And so is the guy in that SUV." My head was spinning. None of this made sense. "What the hell is going on?" I asked, my voice barely steady. The man in the black suit reached my window, tapping on the glass. Hesitantly, I rolled it down. "Nathan, right?" the man said, his voice calm but authoritative. "I'm Agent Carter. We're going to need your dashcam footage." I blinked, completely bewildered. "Dashcam footage? For what?" Carter glanced at Michael, who was now staring at his feet, avoiding eye contact. "Your dashcam has just become crucial evidence in a major FBI operation," Carter said. "You've been caught in the middle of something bigger than you realize." I looked from Carter to Michael and back again. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded. Michael finally spoke, his voice low and shaky. "There's been a sting operation, high-level stuff. We've been tracking a dangerous individual who's been smuggling sensitive government information." I was supposed to be part of the operation, but things went sideways. "They're after me now. And your dashcam? It might have caught something crucial, something that could bring this whole thing down." I stared at him, my mind racing. This was insane. I was just a driver. How had I gotten involved in this? Carter reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. "I'm going to need to take the footage from your dashcam," he said. "It's evidence." Carter reached into his pocket and pulled out a small USB stick. "I'll need to download the footage from your dashcam. It could be critical evidence, Nathan. We don't have much time." My hands were trembling, my heart still pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't supposed to happen. I was just supposed to pick up a passenger, take him to his destination and call it a day. Now I was being dragged into some FBI sting operation like I was part of some Hollywood action movie. I glanced at Michael, still sitting there, hunched over, his hands gripping his briefcase like it was his lifeline. His face had lost all color, and he wasn't making any effort to explain further. The only thing that gave any clarity to the situation was the badge he had flashed earlier. "I need to know what's going on," I said firmly, trying to steady my voice. "You both can't just expect me to hand over the footage without explaining this." Agent Carter sighed and nodded, his face softening for a moment. "You're right. You deserve to know." He glanced around, making sure we weren't drawing attention from passers-by. Then he leaned in a little closer, his voice slower now. "We've been tracking a criminal syndicate for months. High-level stuff, like I said before. They've been smuggling classified government information to foreign agents right under our noses. We set up a sting operation, and Michael here was supposed to deliver the final piece of evidence we needed." Michael flinched at the mention of his name, but he didn't speak. Carter continued, his voice growing tenser. "The problem is someone inside the FBI tipped them off. They knew we were coming. Now Michael's cover is blown and they're after him. We've got agents closing in, but your dashcam? It may have caught something critical. It could show who's following us, maybe even their faces or plates. That footage could be the only evidence we have to take them down." I sat there, stunned. This was real, all of it. My stomach churned as I realized how close I was to something dangerous, something far beyond my control. Part of me wanted to just hand over the footage, let them deal with it, and forget this whole day ever happened. But another part of me, a small part, wanted to know more, to understand what was really going on. "Okay," I said slowly, "but what happens next? What happens after you get the footage?" Carter exchanged a glance with Michael, then turned back to me. "Once we have the footage, we'll bring you to a secure location where you can give a full statement. After that, you're free to go. We'll protect you." I didn't like the sound of that. The words secure location felt like a euphemism for something much more complicated. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, but I knew I didn't have a choice. Not really. I had already been pulled into this mess. I nodded and reached for the dash cam, carefully removing the memory card and handing it over to Carter. He inserted it into his USB stick, and within seconds, he was downloading the footage onto his laptop. Michael shifted uncomfortably in the back seat, his eyes darting between me and the black SUV. "We need to move. We're not safe here." Carter nodded, still focused on the download. "Almost done. Stay calm." But staying calm was impossible. My mind was racing with 1,000 questions. Who were these people chasing Michael? Why was he so important? And how did they manage to infiltrate the FBI? My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden loud bang, a noise that made my blood run cold. I looked up to see a second black SUV speeding toward us from the opposite direction, its tires screeching as it skidded to a halt just a few feet away. The doors flew open and 3 men in dark suits jumped out, guns drawn. "Get down!" Carter shouted, pulling his gun from his holster. He grabbed Michael by the arm and yanked him out of the back seat, shoving him toward the sidewalk. Before I knew what was happening, I was ducking down behind the steering wheel, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The sound of gunfire echoed through the air, sharp and terrifying. I clutched the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white as I tried to make sense of the chaos around me. Carter was shouting commands, firing shots at the men from the second SUV, while Michael crouched behind a parked car, his briefcase still clutched tightly in his hands. The men were closing in, their movements quick and deliberate. These weren't just ordinary criminals, they were professionals. Suddenly, one of the gunmen spotted me inside the car. He aimed his weapon straight at me, and for a split second, I thought it was over. I braced myself, waiting for the inevitable. But before he could pull the trigger, Carter fired a shot that hit the man square in the chest, sending him sprawling to the ground. My breath caught in my throat, a mixture of relief and terror washing over me. "We need to move now!" Carter shouted, grabbing Michael and pulling him to his feet. I didn't need to be told twice. I threw the car into reverse, slamming on the gas as I backed up as fast as I could. The second SUV screeched as it tried to follow, but I wasn't about to stick around and find out how this shootout was going to end. As I sped away, my hands trembling on the wheel, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. Carter was still standing there, firing shots at the remaining gunmen, protecting Michael with his own body. I didn't know if they were going to make it, but I knew one thing for sure: I was done with this nightmare. For a moment, the streets of DC felt eerily quiet as I drove away, the sound of gunfire fading into the distance. My mind was spinning with everything that had just happened. The dashcam footage, the sting operation, the shootout. I couldn't believe I had been dragged into this. But I had the footage, the evidence that could bring down a criminal syndicate, and now I had to make sure it got into the right hands. As I pulled into an empty side street, I stopped the car and took a deep breath. I needed to think. My phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a ride request, it was a message from Carter. "Nathan, we made it. Michael is safe. Bring the footage to the FBI headquarters on 935 Pennsylvania Ave NW. You'll be safe there. This is almost over, but not quite. I sat there for a few minutes, my mind racing. I had the footage. It was in my hands now. But what if the people chasing Michael weren't done? What if they knew about me? What if they came for me next? I shook my head, trying to clear the thoughts. No, I couldn't think like that. Carter and Michael were counting on me. I couldn't let fear stop me from doing the right thing. With a deep breath, I pulled back onto the road, heading toward the FBI headquarters. The streets of Washington, D.C. seemed quieter than usual, almost like the city was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. As I drove, I couldn't help but glance at the dashcam, now dark and silent, no longer recording. It had captured everything: the chase, the gunfight, the people after Michael, and now it was up to me to deliver the evidence that could bring them down. I wasn't just a driver anymore. I was part of something bigger, something dangerous, and I had to see it through. As I pulled up to the FBI headquarters, I parked the car and sat there for a moment, staring at the massive building in front of me. This was it, the end of the ride. I grabbed the USB stick with the footage, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car. The world felt heavier now, like I had just walked into something I could never fully understand. But I knew one thing for sure: this was far from over. It was a gloomy Seattle evening, the kind where the rain doesn't pour. It just lingers in the air, hanging in a mist that soaks everything slowly. I'd been driving for one of those rideshare apps for a while now. It wasn't my main gig, but the extra cash helped with bills, and Seattle was a decent city for it, at least on the days when traffic didn't make you want to pull your hair out. That night, my route had me starting near the Space Needle. Tourists loved the spot, so it wasn't unusual to get requests from there. It was just after 7 p.m. when the notification popped up. Lily and Ryan, a shared ride, headed to Capitol Hill. The app also let me know they'd be sharing the ride with another passenger, Zoe, who was somewhere nearby. I didn't think twice about it. Shared rides were common enough in Seattle. The rain had picked up slightly and the windshield wipers had started their rhythmic dance. I pulled up to 400 Broad Street, and sure enough, there they were, a couple standing near the entrance, huddled under an umbrella. Lily, with long brown hair, was clutching Ryan's arm, laughing about something. Ryan had this relaxed, easygoing look about him. They seemed like the kind of couple that still enjoyed each other's company. I rolled down the window. "Lily and Ryan?" "Yeah, that's us," Ryan called out, walking over. "Thanks, man." They got in the back seat, Lily settling in first and Ryan following. They smiled at me through the rearview mirror as I confirmed the route. Capitol Hill, about a 10-minute drive without traffic. Not too bad. "We've got one more pickup, right?" Lily asked, scrolling through her phone. "Yep, someone named Zoe. Shouldn't be too far," I replied, pulling away from the curb. The rain continued to patter against the car as I navigated through the streets, following the app's directions to Zoe's location. As we drove, Lily and Ryan made small talk in the back. They seemed happy, maybe even a little tipsy from an earlier dinner or drinks. After a few minutes, I arrived at the second pickup point, a quiet side street not far from Pike Place Market. Zoe was waiting there, standing alone under a streetlight, no umbrella or jacket, just standing there like the rain didn't bother her at all. That's when I first felt something. Off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was something strange about her calmness. She opened the door and slid into the front seat without a word. Her clothes were a little damp, her hair sticking to her face. She looked at me with this sharp, direct gaze and gave a small smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Zoe, right?" I asked, glancing at the app to confirm. "Yeah, that's me," she replied, her voice low and steady. I nodded and pulled back onto the road. For the first few minutes, the ride was quiet. I was used to it. Shared rides often meant passengers just kept to themselves, especially when they didn't know each other. But then Zoe broke the silence. "So, you two are Lily and Ryan, right?" she asked, turning slightly in her seat to look back at them. Lily seemed startled for a second. Yeah, how'd you know?" Zoe smiled, and there was something unsettling in the way she did it. "Just a guess," she said, though the way she said it made it sound like it wasn't a guess at all. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Ryan had tensed up a little, like he didn't know what to make of Zoe. It was subtle, but I noticed it. "So, heading to Capitol Hill?" Zoe asked casually, but her tone was too knowing, too familiar. "That's a nice spot. You two live there?" Yeah. Just a few blocks from Volunteer Park," Ryan replied, but there was a hint of hesitation in his voice now. "That's a beautiful area," Zoe said, her voice light but with an undercurrent that made me uncomfortable. "You must love the view." Lily shifted in her seat, clearly feeling the same weird vibe that I was. "Yeah, we do. It's nice." For the next few minutes, no one said anything. The silence in the car felt thick, like we were all waiting for something to happen. I focused on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then Zoe spoke up again, this time out of nowhere. "You know, Lily, your favorite cafe is that little one near Broadway, isn't it? With the green awning?" Lily's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "How do you know that?" she asked, her voice sharper now. Zoe didn't turn around this time. She just stared out the window, her expression unreadable. "I've seen you there before," she said simply. Lily exchanged a glance with Ryan, her hand tightening around his. "I don't remember seeing you," she said, her voice shaky. "You wouldn't," Zoe replied, her tone flat. "You were always focused on something else." Ryan leaned forward slightly. "Okay, this is getting weird. How do you know so much about us?" Zoe didn't answer right away. Instead, she pointed ahead. "There's a turn coming up. You might want to take it to avoid the traffic on Fifth Avenue." I frowned. The app hadn't mentioned anything about traffic. I kept driving straight. "I'm serious," Zoe said, her voice now a little more insistent. "You should take the next left. There's an accident up ahead." I glanced at the app again. No warnings, no detours. "How do you know that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Zoe turned her head just slightly, enough to give me a sideways glance. "I just know." Against my better judgment, I decided to take the turn. Maybe she was just really familiar with the area, or maybe she'd seen something on her phone. But as we rounded the corner, sure enough, I saw the flashing lights of police cars up ahead, blocking off the street. A chill ran down my spine. Ryan leaned back, shaking his head. "This is too much. How do you know all this stuff?" Zoe smiled again, that same unsettling smile. "It's just a gift," she said quietly. Lily was visibly uncomfortable now. "Ryan, I don't like this," she whispered. I didn't like it either. Something was seriously off about this woman. The way she seemed to know everything about them, the way she predicted things before they happened, it wasn't normal. I started to wonder if I should pull over, kick her out of the car. But something held me back. We continued driving in silence for a few more minutes. The rain had started coming down harder, the wipers working overtime to clear the windshield. The tension in the car was palpable, like everyone was waiting for something to happen. Finally, we were nearing Capitol Hill, just a couple of blocks from the couple's destination. I could feel the relief creeping in. Whatever was going on, at least it was almost over. But then Zoe spoke again, and this time her voice was softer, almost hesitant. Lily, there's something I need to tell you. Lily didn't respond, just stared at her through the rearview mirror, her eyes filled with suspicion and fear. I know this is strange, Zoe continued, her voice shaking slightly, but I wasn't supposed to meet you like this. This wasn't the plan. What are you talking about? Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Zoe took a deep breath. I'm your sister. The words hung in the air like a bombshell. The car went completely silent. I stared ahead, my hands gripping the wheel tighter. Ryan's face went pale, and Lily's eyes widened in disbelief. What? Lily stammered, her voice cracking. What are you talking about? I don't have a sister. Zoe turned to face them fully now, her expression softer than it had been all night. You do. You just don't remember me. You were too young when I left. Lily looked at Ryan, her eyes pleading for him to make sense of what she was hearing. But Ryan didn't meet her gaze. He just stared out the window, avoiding her eyes. Ryan? Lily's voice wavered. What's going on? Ryan finally turned to her, his face filled with regret. I'm sorry, Lily. I didn't want it to come out like this. Lily's hand shot up to her mouth, covering a gasp. You knew about this? Ryan nodded slowly. I hired Zoe. I found her a few months ago and planned this whole thing. It was supposed to be a surprise, a way for you two to reconnect. I thought it would be special. Lily looked like she was going to be sick. A surprise? You thought this would be a good idea? Zoe's eyes filled with tears. Lily, I didn't know how to approach you. I didn't want to shock you, but Ryan thought. Lily turned away from both of them, staring out the window, her whole body tense. I don't believe this. This is insane. The tension in the car hit its peak. I didn't know whether to pull over or keep driving. This wasn't some awkward misunderstanding. It was a deep, emotional wound that had just been ripped open in the middle of an ordinary rideshare trip. The tension was suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was intruding on something intensely private. Lily turned to Ryan, her eyes wide and filled with a mix of shock and betrayal. You thought this would be the way to tell me? A stranger in the car dropping hints and creeping me out? Are you out of your mind? Ryan's face fell. He looked helpless, caught between his grand plan and the reality of how terribly wrong everything had gone. I wanted it to be meaningful. I didn't want to just tell you casually. I thought it would be. Meaningful? Lily's voice rose, her frustration spilling out. You hired someone to stalk us in a car. This feels like a nightmare. Zoe's voice broke in, soft but steady. I didn't want it to happen like this either, Lily. I never wanted to scare you. Ryan reached out to me months ago, and I've been thinking about how to approach you ever since. This was just supposed to be a surprise reunion, but it's gotten out of hand. I kept driving, feeling like I'd been sucked into the most uncomfortable situation imaginable. My job was just to get them to Capitol Hill. But now I felt like I was witnessing a personal drama unfold, one that had gone so far off course, I wasn't sure there was any way to fix it. Lily shook her head, her voice trembling. I don't even remember having a sister. I don't remember you. How do you expect me to believe this? Zoe's eyes softened, and she turned in her seat to fully face Lily. I know you don't remember. You were too young when I left, but I've thought about you every single day since. I've kept track of you, your life, the things you've done. I didn't know how to reach out. I was afraid you wouldn't want me in your life after all these years. Lily stared at her, speechless, as the car continued down the slick Seattle streets. Ryan was silent now, looking out the window, likely realizing that his well-intentioned plan had crashed and burned. Finally, Lily's voice broke the silence. What happened? Why did you leave? Zoe took a deep breath, her voice barely audible. Our family was a mess. You were only 3 when I ran away. Our parents weren't good people, Lily. They weren't safe, and I couldn't stay there. I thought about taking you with me, but I was only 16. I had no idea how to care for you, no money, nowhere to go. I thought I'd come back for you one day, but then I found out you'd been adopted. Lily's eyes filled with tears as she listened, her anger slowly giving way to something else. I had no idea. My adoptive parents never told me anything about you. Zoe nodded, tears brimming in her own eyes now. I didn't know where you were for years. By the time I tracked you down, you were already living your own life. You seemed happy, and I didn't want to disrupt that. But then Ryan reached out, and I thought, maybe it was time. The car was quiet again. The only sound, the steady hum of the tires on the wet pavement and the occasional patter of rain on the windshield. Lily wiped away a tear, her voice softer now. This is a lot to take in. I don't know what to think. Ryan finally spoke, his voice filled with regret. I'm sorry, Lily. I thought this would be something special, but I see now that I handled it all wrong. Lily sighed, her shoulders slumping. Yeah, you did. This was a terrible way to spring this on me. Zoe, sensing the tension, spoke up once more. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, Lily. I just wanted the chance to explain, to tell you the truth. What you do with that is up to you. The car was approaching their destination now, the familiar streets of Capitol Hill coming into view. I felt the tension in the car begin to shift, though the emotions were still raw. I need time, Lily finally said, her voice barely a whisper. I need to process all of this. Zoe nodded, understanding in her eyes. Of course. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. I pulled up to their stop, the small cafe with the green awning that Zoe had mentioned earlier. The rain had lightened up a bit, the streetlights casting a warm glow over the slick pavement. The atmosphere felt different now, less tense, but still heavy with unresolved emotions. Lily and Ryan both got out, and Lily hesitated for a moment before turning to Zoe. Thank you for telling me. I don't know where we go from here, but I'll be in touch. Zoe smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile this time. That's all I wanted. Take care, Lily. Ryan gave me an apologetic look before following Lily onto the sidewalk. They walked off together, leaving me alone in the car with Zoe. For a moment, we just sat there in silence. Finally, I turned to her. That was intense. Zoe chuckled softly, though there was sadness in her eyes. Yeah, it wasn't supposed to happen like this. I nodded, unsure of what else to say. After a few seconds, Zoe leaned back in her seat and let out a deep breath. Thanks for the ride, Daniel. I guess it didn't exactly go as planned. Life rarely does, I replied. She gave me one last smile before getting out of the car and disappearing into the night. I watched her walk away, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over me. It was strange, being part of such an intimate moment in someone else's life. I wasn't sure what would happen between Zoe and Lily, but I hoped that somehow they'd find a way to heal the wounds of the past. I pulled away from the curb, the rain starting to pick up again, and headed back into the night. Seattle had a way of swallowing secrets, but every now and then they'd bubble to the surface in the most unexpected places. And sometimes they surface in the backseat of a shared ride.